April 14th, 1865. Good Friday. The air in Washington, D.C. carries the weight of something unspoken. President Abraham Lincoln wakes early, joins his son Robert for breakfast, and begins what appears to be an ordinary day of meetings and paperwork. But there is nothing ordinary about this day. In just hours, he will be dead, shot in the back of the head while watching a play at Ford's Theater. And yet, somehow, Lincoln already knew. This is not a story about conspiracy theories or speculation. This is a story about documented dreams, verified by cabinet members, written in official diaries, and witnessed by those closest to the president. A story that raises one terrifying question. Did Abraham Lincoln predict his own assassination? The first sign came years earlier. Shortly after winning the election in November 1860, Lincoln stood before a mirror in his Springfield, Illinois home. What he saw made his blood run cold. Two faces stared back at him. One was clear, sharp, unmistakably his own. The other was pale, ghost-like, fading into the background of the reflection. Lincoln called his wife Mary to see it, but the image had vanished. When he repositioned himself, the double reflection appeared again. Mary Todd Lincoln, deeply superstitious and drawn to the supernatural, was horrified by what her husband described. She interpreted the vision immediately. The sharp image meant he would serve his first term as president. The faint, ghostly face meant he would be elected to a second term, but would not survive it. Lincoln tried to dismiss her fears, but the image stayed with him, haunting the edges of his consciousness. But it was the dream that came in early April 1865 that would seal his fate. The Civil War was ending. Lee had surrendered just days before. The nation was exhaling after 4 years of bloodshed. Lincoln should have felt relief, but instead he felt something else, dread. According to Ward Hill Lamon, Lincoln's former law partner, close friend, and self-appointed bodyguard, the president shared a disturbing dream with a small group that included his wife Mary and Lamon himself. The account comes from Lamon's writings, specifically his book Recollections of Abraham Lincoln, published in 1895, though historians note Lamon claimed to have recorded the details from notes he made in 1865. Lincoln described the dream in chilling detail. "About 10 days ago, I retired very late," he began. "I had been up waiting for important dispatches from the front. I could not have been long in bed when I fell into a slumber, for I was weary. I soon began to dream. There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping." In the dream, Lincoln rose from his bed and wandered through the White House, following the sound of mourning. Every room he entered was empty, yet the sobbing continued, echoing through the halls. The lights were on, everything looked familiar, but there was no one there, just the relentless sound of grief filling every corner of the presidential residence. Lincoln continued searching until he reached the East Room. There, he found the source of the weeping. "Before me was a catafalque on which rested a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments," Lincoln recounted. "Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards, and there was a throng of people gazing mournfully upon the corpse, whose face was covered, others weeping pitifully." Lincoln approached one of the soldiers standing guard. "Who is dead in the White House?" he demanded. The soldier turned to face him. "The president," came the reply. "He was killed by an assassin." At that moment, a loud burst of grief erupted from the crowd, and Lincoln woke up. He did not sleep again that night. The dream had shaken him to his core. Days later, when sharing the story, Lincoln admitted, Although it was only a dream, I have been strangely annoyed by it ever since. But here is where the story becomes even more unsettling. Lincoln insisted to Lamon that the body in the dream was not his own. He claimed it was some other fellow who had been killed. This detail is crucial because it shows Lincoln himself did not interpret the dream as a prophecy of his own death, at least not consciously. And yet, his subconscious had conjured the exact scenario that would play out days later: a president, an assassin, a nation in mourning. Historians have debated the authenticity of Lamon's account for decades. Some point to inconsistencies in the timeline. Lamon stated the dream occurred about 10 days before the assassination, but Lincoln mentioned in the dream that he had been waiting for dispatches from the front. Between late March and early April, Lincoln was actually traveling with the Army of the Potomac, not at the White House. Additionally, neither Lamon nor Mary Todd Lincoln mentioned the dream immediately after the assassination, which seems strange given its prophetic nature. The account only appeared in print 30 years later, published by Lamon's daughter after his death. However, there is compelling evidence that Lincoln was deeply interested in dreams and believed they held significance. In 1863, Lincoln wrote a letter to his wife Mary, who was in Philadelphia with their young son Tad. In the letter, Lincoln warned her to put Tad's pistol away because he had an ugly dream about him. This shows Lincoln took his dreams seriously enough to act on them and warn his family. But the most convincing evidence comes from what happened on the morning of April 14, 1865, just hours before Lincoln was shot. The president held a cabinet meeting at noon. In attendance were some of the most powerful men in government: Secretary of the Navy Gideon Wells, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and General Ulysses S. Grant himself. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss Reconstruction and await news from General Sherman about the final Confederate surrender in North Carolina. During that meeting, Lincoln shared another dream. This account is verified through multiple sources, most notably the diary of Gideon Wells, who recorded the conversation just 3 days after it occurred. Wells wrote that Lincoln told the cabinet he'd had the usual dream which he had preceding nearly every great and important event of the war. In this recurring dream, Lincoln described being aboard an indescribable vessel, moving with great speed toward a dark and indefinite shore. He had experienced this same dream before major battles: Antietam, Gettysburg, Vicksburg. Each time, momentous news followed. General Grant, sitting at the table, pushed back on this interpretation. He mentioned that the dream had also occurred before the Battle of Stone's River, which Grant did not consider a victory. Lincoln looked at Grant with curiosity and replied that they might differ on that point, but regardless, the dream had preceded that battle as well. Then Lincoln said something that, in hindsight, feels like a final prophecy. We shall, judging from the past, have great news very soon. The great news did come, but it was not about Sherman's victory, it was about Lincoln's death. That evening, Lincoln and his wife attended Ford's Theater to watch Our American Cousin. At approximately 10:15 p.m., John Wilkes Booth entered the presidential box and fired a single shot from a Derringer pistol into the back of Lincoln's head. The president was carried to a boarding house across the street, where he died the following morning at 7:22 a.m. Just as the dream had foretold, the president had been killed by an assassin. So, what are we to make of these dreams? Were they genuine premonitions, or simply the anxious mind of a man who lived under constant threat? Lincoln had survived multiple assassination attempts during his presidency. In 1861, Detective Allan Pinkerton uncovered a plot to kill Lincoln as he traveled through Baltimore on his way to his inauguration. Lincoln was forced to sneak through the city in the middle of the night, accompanied only by Lamon and Pinkerton. In 1864, a bullet passed through Lincoln's hat while he was riding alone at night near the soldiers' home. The threats were real and constant. Perhaps Lincoln's dreams were simply his mind processing this ever-present danger, or perhaps there is something deeper at work. Lincoln's interest in the meaning of dreams was well known. His wife Mary was deeply involved in spiritualism, especially after the death of their son Willie in 1862. Mary held seances in the White House, attempting to contact Willie's spirit. Lincoln attended at least 2 of these seances, though he maintained a skeptical attitude. Still, the exposure to spiritualist ideas may have influenced his belief in the significance of dreams. There is also the cultural context to consider. In the 19th century, dreams were often viewed as messages from the divine or warnings from beyond. Biblical figures from Joseph to Daniel interpreted dreams as prophecies. Shakespeare's plays were filled with prophetic dreams and supernatural omens. Lincoln, an avid reader and deeply familiar with the Bible, would have been aware of this tradition. When he shared his death dream with Lamon, he did so with some show of playful humor, suggesting he was both troubled by it and trying to distance himself from taking it too seriously. But the facts remain undeniable. Lincoln dreamed of a president killed by an assassin. He dreamed of sailing toward a dark shore. He saw a double image of himself in the mirror, one face fading away. His superstitious wife warned him he would not survive his second term. And on April 14, 1865, all of these premonitions converged into a single, tragic reality. What makes this story even more haunting is what happened in the final hours of Lincoln's life. On the morning of the assassination, Lincoln's bodyguard, William H. Crook, was preparing to go off duty. Normally, Lincoln would say goodnight to Crook as he left for the evening, but on April 14th, Lincoln paused, looked at Crook, and said goodbye instead of goodnight. Crook later recalled that Lincoln had never said goodbye before. It was always goodnight. That small change in wording haunted Crook for the rest of his life. At Ford's Theater, Lincoln's assigned bodyguard, John Frederick Parker, was supposed to remain outside the presidential box, but Parker abandoned his post, leaving the president completely unprotected. Some accounts suggest Parker went to a nearby saloon for a drink. When John Wilkes Booth approached the box, there was no one to stop him. The door was unguarded. Lincoln was defenseless. The dream had become reality. In the days following the assassination, Lincoln's body was placed on a catafalque in the East Room of the White House, exactly as he had seen in his dream. Soldiers stood guard. Mourners wept. The scene was identical to what Lincoln had described. The president had walked through his own funeral before it happened. The question that haunts historians is simple. Could Lincoln have prevented his death? If he truly believed the dream was a warning, why did he still go to Ford's Theater that night? Some argue Lincoln was fatalistic, believing his fate was sealed. Others suggest he felt a duty to appear in public despite the risks, showing the nation that the president would not hide in fear. Mary Todd Lincoln begged him not to go that night. She had a bad feeling. But Lincoln insisted. General Grant was supposed to accompany them, but he declined at the last minute, choosing instead to visit his family in New Jersey. If Grant had been there, would the extra security have stopped Booth? We will never know. What we do know is that Abraham Lincoln, the man who saved the Union and freed the enslaved, died exactly as he had foreseen. Whether his dreams were genuine premonitions, psychological manifestations of fear, or simply tragic coincidences, they remain one of the most mysterious and chilling aspects of his story. Lincoln's death dream stands as a reminder that even the most powerful leaders are mortal, that death comes for everyone, and that sometimes, in the darkest corners of our minds, we see it coming. The final word belongs to Ward Hill Lamon, who wrote years later with deep regret. On the night of April 14, 1865, Lamon was not in Washington. Lincoln had sent him to Richmond on official business. Lamon, who had protected Lincoln countless times, who had traveled with him in secret through Baltimore, who had armed himself with revolvers and bowie knives to defend the president, was not there when it mattered most. Lamon later wrote that if he had been present, he would have never allowed Lincoln to attend the theater that night. The dream would have been enough to keep him away. But Lincoln went anyway, and history unfolded exactly as he had dreamed it would. The president was killed by an assassin. The nation wept, and the man who had seen his own death 10 days before it happened became a legend, not just for how he lived, but for how he knew, somehow, that his time was running out.